As we live out the difficulty of shelter in place, some are asking, are we doing the right thing? Is the death count really worth the economic downturn? It's difficult to quantify lives saved if we didn't really know the lives were in danger. So today we talked with James Hilliard, who is on the front lines of COVID-19 pandemic, where he will share the differences between the outbreak in the Western Coastal Metropolises and the other states, and the science and strategies that affect us all and what success looks like. We are uncovering the science behind shelter in place as we are processing what it means to praise prevention. As a kid, I would always get ear infections. It was the intense pain. If I got a cold, it was over. I would spend hours crying, and then I would sniff the snot into the back of my head, and it would get worse. My mom would prepare a hot water bottle to ease the just searing pain. After years of these waves of infection, my parents were pulling their hair out. They're like, what can we do? Cold season was a time of infinite sadness. The doctor suggested, hey, let's take his adenoids out. What's an adenoid? My parents saw hope, though. They're like, let's book an OR. They're desperate. I still don't know what an adenoid is, but now I know I don't have them. So, but it was the healing part that I remember most. No one knew what to do to help. So they pretended adenoids were really like tonsils, which was a great idea for me, because unlimited ice cream. Like, it hurt like hell to eat ice cream, but doctor's orders. More ice cream, please. Chocolate sauce. So about day 3, I was up and ready. My mom also knew I was up and ready because I was a terror. But I couldn't go back to school for another 2 days. I begged to go back to school, but my mom wanted me to go back to school. But again, doctor's orders. So she gave me more ice cream. That worked out for me. But the deal was school was filled with kids with colds, terrible for my recovery. And we had to rethink our spring break, even though I looked and felt fine. It was a waiting game. Until I was ready to enter the world again. And it was a waiting game for my parents, who very much wanted me to go back into the world again. So we waited. And I didn't have an ear infection, actually, again. So right now, we are in a waiting game. And though it might feel fine to return to business as usual, it might not be best for our long-term health. So that's really our challenge today. To make decisions that will benefit tomorrow. What are these decisions that we're going to make? I'm going to show a quick video that shows you 2 sides of a story. The first side of the story is what is going on in Europe with COVID-19. And then the other side of the story is what is going on some places in the United States. And so here we go. We're going to see a little bit of 2 sides of different stories.
Reminding people to stay indoors in Spain. The military drafted in to disinfect nursing homes and public transport. Despite a slowing down in the country's rate of coronavirus transmission, the World Health Organization's warning European governments to think carefully before relaxing their lockdowns or social distancing measures.
These protesters were not interested in social distancing. As activists held their rally outside the state capitol building here, many are openly dismissive of the science and increasingly seething at the economic cost that they are paying.
This arbitrary and unconstitutional overreach has destroyed my career. I had a good paying career, paying my bills, earning good money. Now I'm subject to trying to find a job for $20 an hour because I will not be able to get my job back.
One force has amplified these protests, namely the president himself, who is arguing that the American economy must open as rapidly as possible. It's an extraordinary fact that he is siding with these anti-lockdown activists and not with his own scientific advisors.
These protesters are a minority of Americans, but they are a potent coalition of gun rights activists and those fearful of the economic carnage unfolding. As the lockdown continues, these are voices of protest that will only grow in number.
So, James Hilliard practices as a certified registered nurse anesthesiologist in the Department of Anesthesiology in Perioperative Medicine. He talks to us today as a citizen and essential worker. His thoughts are his own and do not represent his position in the teaching institution that he's in. Jim, thank you for coming to the show and thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for posting that wonderful picture of me and my brother's dog.
Hey, I can only get one thing, from Instagram. So there you go.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
So what got you into the healthcare industry?
A lot of luck. I had an aunt who was a nurse, and I was in undergraduate. My mother became disabled, and I was told by my dad that I probably couldn't attend the university I was at. We couldn't afford it anymore. So I went to my financial aid advisor and asked for some help. And he said, "Have you thought about becoming a nurse?" And I said, "If it means I can stay here, I'll try it out." And so I ended up getting a grant and becoming a nursing major. And at the time when I was training, this is in 1994, I was one of two men in my class. When I walked into my first nursing class, the professor thought that she was being pranked and asked me to leave. And it wasn't until the other female students kind of stood up and said, no, he's supposed to be here, that she let me attend the class. And then I worked in critical care in the ICU in downtown DC for 5.5 years. And that's when I found out about this position, which is certified registered nurse anesthetist. And while it is difficult to pronounce, it's a fantastic job. For those of you that don't know what it is, it's a nurse practitioner of anesthesia, so an advanced practice provider. I have a bachelor's in nursing, and then critical care experience. Then I went back to school for about 3 years to learn anesthesia. And my practice involves anything from putting epidurals and spinals in, numbing up extremities, giving somebody sedation for a colonoscopy, or general anesthesia for brain surgery. During this pandemic, my highlighted aspect of my specialty is putting the breathing tubes in order to secure the airway and hook patients up to ventilators, which obviously is a very important job. During this pandemic, it's kind of highlighted the need for a specialist to be putting those devices in for a couple reasons. One, obviously for the safety of the patient, but also when the process of putting the breathing tube in is a very risky procedure for the providers. That is, it's described as an aerosol generating procedure, AGP, which basically increases the viral spread. And so The specialty as a whole has developed a lot of algorithms in order to reduce the time that it takes for a person to put the breathing tube in, reduce the aerosol generating aspect of the procedure itself, and then protect the provider as much as possible, because we are staring down the trachea as we put the breathing tube in, and so the risk of being exposed is very high.
That's huge. Well, thank you again for your service. As somebody who's on the front lines of COVID-19, what are you seeing right now? Well,
as of this morning, we have had, according to the Oregon Health Authority, 99 deaths in the state. Majority of those patients have either heart disease, some underlying neurological disease, or diabetes. We've tested over 52,000 Oregonians, and we have about 2,380 something positive tests out of those in the state of Oregon. Most in the state, most of our hotspots are in nursing homes. We continue to see clinically ill COVID patients, COVID positive patients, all along with the same clinical picture that you read about in the news. Those requiring very high amount of support from critical care specialists, advanced ventilator settings, ventilators, prone positioning to optimize the oxygenation, all the things that you've read about in the news. We also have patients that just need oxygen and are waiting to recover. But in general, we have much lower numbers than other areas of the world or in this country.
Tell me about that. Like, what is going on in Oregon versus other states, and why is that?
Well, I mean, I think that, far into the late stages of this pandemic, and maybe even for all the epidemiology PhDs that will be awarded in the future, that question will be tough to answer. One thing I can tell you is that it's definitely multifactorial. I think that the biggest reason is a lot of luck.
Okay.
We to our north, our neighboring Washingtonians really did some extraordinary things. Some of the people I would like to mention, Dr. Helen Chu, who was running the Seattle flu study, which is sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is really one of the first people that discovered the presence of coronavirus in the state of Washington, and really tried hard to alert local authorities, who then alerted federal authorities, who really told her to cease and desist, to stop testing people for this, because their testing wasn't approved and that they had not received consent from those patients to use their data in this form to manage a public health crisis. She went on testing without permission. And then kind of the rest of that was picked up by the University of Washington Virology Lab with Dr. Greninger and Dr. Keith Jerome, who undertook that responsibility and used a loophole in the FDA by consenting patients for research. Okay. And in that consent, the patients gave them permission to use that data towards public health. And that early recognition, it happening so close to us, and the date in which it happened, despite the bureaucratic obstacles that were presented to those scientists and those specialists, I think we really benefited from that.
Yeah,
we were very lucky. And if you look at most of the Western states, their governors acted at least on par, or in some cases earlier than other governors, to close schools, to dictate stay-at-home orders. And we've really benefited from that. On top of that, there are certainly going to be some characteristics, I think, that will be studied in the future. If you just take a look at our urban center here in Oregon, 70% of our residences are single family homes. We don't have high density skyscrapers and towers. And some of that is just gone into city planning for a completely different reason. You know, we don't have urban sprawl here or suburban sprawl here. We don't have high density areas. That's changing right now, obviously, with the infill project, residential infill project in the city. But for the most part, we are a city of single family homes. The compliance has been good. People are doing their best. Private companies are starting to mandate their own rules. New Seasons, I know, has just recently announced that you have to have a mask in there. Yeah. When you go in New Seasons, their aisles are one way. In between each customer, they spray down the conveyor belt, they spray down the keypad. So businesses are taking responsibility. Oregonians are taking responsibility. And then the overall context of the decision making, for better or for worse, was initiated early on time.
So we were lucky that that was it Chu who decided.
Yeah.
To kind of...
We were lucky in general that the Seattle flu study existed and that it was sponsored and happening, and then to have such great scientists managing it, people that were able to recognize what were happening, basically it's understanding that their surveillance could identify a target other than which it was intended. Is just exceedingly lucky.
Wow. And we were early to that, and now we have seen that it hasn't been a widespread because we've been compliant with shelter in place.
Yeah, and then of course it's not. I'm sure we'll talk about it. It's not without sacrifice or criticism. Yeah. But part of why we're here in the effort of praising prevention is that praising prevention is not attractive. It's not sexy, because proving a negative is not only difficult to do. It's even if you can do it, it doesn't usually get the recognition it deserves.
Okay. What would you have to say about that in regards to how would you articulate it to give it the weight that it needs?
Yeah. Well, I think, you have seen a lot of this. I think everybody has established this flatten the curve in their vernacular, right? Mm-hmm. And the benefit of putting that in the consciousness of everyone, and really the benefit of sheltering the way we have, staying at home, has been not to overwhelm the hospital system. If you take our state, what we've been able to accomplish, which again is prevention, it's readiness, preparedness, readiness. These are things that not a lot of people want to participate in because it's not proven to be effective until you need it. But by staying at home and by every Oregonian doing their best to take care of themselves, we in the hospital have been able to develop multi-layered plans. We have been able to acquire PPE. We have been able to acquire ventilators and then donate ventilators to places that need them more than we do. We have been able to benefit from other hotspots to find out what doesn't work. Unfortunately, we don't have many things that work, but part of the benefit in this area of a flattened curve is that we can find out what doesn't work, so that if and when we do experience our surge, we have the equipment, we have the plans in order to act swiftly and decisively. Our mindset, when we begin to reopen, if we do have another surge, we will be more mentally prepared to know what we need to do. These are all benefits of doing what we're doing now.
And those plans, is it really what happens when somebody has COVID and comes into an emergency
Yeah,
room, or
yeah.
what is it?
Yeah, it's as individual as that. It's understanding how are we going to do two things. We're going to optimize our intervention to help save this person's life, and how are we going to protect the providers? Because one of the things that we're trying to balance for all this is maintaining a healthy healthcare workforce, so that when and if the surge happens, we can take care of those patients without infecting and creating more patients. And in the course of taking care of those patients, we've learned about a lot of drugs, had a lot of hope for a lot of interventions. Unfortunately, the way it goes in most things, not just in science and medicine, is that a majority of the things that we hope for and guess at are wrong. And so we don't have a definitive treatment right now. We have things that unfortunately buy every patient more time to let their own immune system declare itself or heal.
Okay. So give me an understanding of what the approach is that our governor in Oregon is taking.
Right. So there's been a couple great PSAs. The one that really comes to mind, one that many of you have seen, maybe the line of matches. Have you seen this video?
I have.
Okay, so there's a line of wooden matches, and you have one match lit at the end. You just see the matches light up, and they take, as the lit matches are coming across the screen, they pull one match away, and the last match fizzles, and then none of the matches ignite. Okay. The other one is from the state of Ohio. Their great Governor DeWine, who's really, in the face of a lot of opposition, had great leadership. It's a very, very intriguing video. It's shot from above, and it's mouse traps all set with ping pong balls. Mm-hmm. And the ping pong ball is dropped from almost behind you. You're facing down, and it falls on a stage of maybe 50, 100 mouse traps all close together. Yeah. And one sets off another ping pong ball. Yeah. Then they space them all apart, and you see a ping pong ball drop in between every one and then off screen without any being triggered. And this is obviously displays the benefit of reducing transmission with this disease, especially. It's obvious to us, or getting more obvious to the scientists that are at the forefront of understanding this novel virus, that the viral shedding in asymptomatic patients is quite high, higher than we may have appreciated before. And distancing ourselves, reducing contact transmission, reducing aerosol transmission, and increasing the distance between us and other people has its benefit. I think that what is also going to be helpful here as we enter, like I've told you before, we're in the very early stages of this. As our approach to this continues, we have to continue to see every patient as an unlit match, or as a mousetrap that hasn't been sprung yet. And by that I mean potential. An unlit match or an unsprung spring has action potential. It has the potential to get sick, or in this metaphor, potential to get set, or potentially get lit. Yeah. And that's what's being missed right now. What I think is important for the mindset of everyone who's dealing with that, which is everyone in the world, is that when we talk about flatten the curve, we've really been focused on this y-axis, the vertical axis, trying to shrink this down. But as we continue to endure this, we will be much more focused here on the x-axis, this longitudinal one. Okay. Because when the curve goes up and down like this, or the curve goes flat like this, what doesn't change is the space under the curve. Okay. The space under the curve is the percentage of patients that will either become infected or die from this virus. What we've elected to do with the stay-at-home order is to buy us time, so stretch out that percentage of infected patients over time. We haven't done anything to reduce the space under the curve, what we've done is spread it out over time so that we can acquire PPE, so that we can create protocols in order to take better care of these patients. And we don't overload the healthcare system. So patients that are normally having their heart attack or normally having their brain tumor can get treated, and we don't have all of these other peripheral increases in mortality and morbidity because our healthcare system is overwhelmed.
Okay. And is this a controversial stance to do this?
Unfortunately, it is. I think that your video really highlighted that. You know, this pandemic, and every pandemic does not exist in a vacuum. For as much as the scientific data would like for it just to exist in a petri dish and apply medication and be able to, arrive at an outcome, this pandemic is making humans ill, and humans are subject to zeitgeist. We right now exist in our country in a very ideological and tribal time. And we are in a situation now where the sacrifices that we're making appear to be greater than the illness. Mm. And that, coupled with a growing distrust of our institutions, whether they be governmental or scientific, has unfortunately created this perfect storm of disbelief and a lack of trust in science. Okay. So, it's really unfortunate, but for as novel and as perfect as this virus is displaying itself, it's also exploiting us at a time when our country is very susceptible to information, misinformation, misinterpretation of information, miscommunication, augmentation of miscommunication, augmentation of misinformation. And unfortunately, just like your video showed, we're seeing a lot of that.
Okay. What is the science telling us about this approach, the approach of staying at home? And I mean, give me your take on it, because I mean, I think we know what it's supposed to do. It's just supposed to keep you well. But tell me what you're thinking the science is saying.
Well, I mean, I think, as far as just kind of transitioning from the controversy of science right now and the impact on our lives and the economy and people's jobs, there was a great quote out of Europe where a leader, I can't remember the country, but basically stated, right now we don't know how to resuscitate patients of COVID, but we do know how to resuscitate the economy. And that our focus needs to be on trying to prepare every state to handle the potential surge. Like I said, just because we have low numbers now, all that really means is that we are a state of potential hosts for this virus. Nothing under that curve changes until we have definitive treatment, vaccine, or herd immunity. Okay? There's nothing other than those three things that changes the shape of that curve. Okay?
Herd immunity, a vaccine, and what was the other one?
A definitive treatment.
Definitive treatment, okay. Which, isn't that a vaccine?
Well, a vaccine would be preventative treatment.
Ah.
And then definitive treatment would be something that, yeah. And so you take a look at something like HIV/AIDS, right? Mm-hmm. No vaccine, but we have definitive treatment. We have now the antiviral cocktail, and people are living relatively normal lives as long as they're able to afford and maintain those medications.
Gotcha.
Right? Yeah. So that would be an example of definitive treatment.
Okay.
The real, it's obvious that for as long as we are going to have this pandemic with us, even you just give the normal time course it takes to create a vaccine and prove a vaccine to be viable, it's going to be difficult for us to maintain what we're doing right now, especially the current controversy or disagreement about the position.
Yeah.
So we have to try and maintain a way to reduce asymptomatic transmission, find a way to maintain lower densities. This virus thrives on density. And that doesn't mean zero. If you say what we're doing right now is we've lowered our density all the way, we are going to begin to, many states have said this, begin to increase or take some chances here, because it's obvious that our economy can't keep going like this. But I like to use this metaphor, this poker metaphor. Do you play Texas Hold'em at all?
I have.
Okay, so you know how in Texas Hold'em you have blinds, right? Big blind, small blind, and those are forced bets, right?
Yes.
You can get dealt a hand and just fold every time, but that blind comes around and you're forced to give money, right? And that's the position right now. We're folding every time, but unfortunately, every time the big blind, small blind come around, we have to throw chips in, and unfortunately, those are the 99 people that are dying because of our density in nursing homes, because of the nature of this virus, okay?
Okay.
Once we start reopening, we're going to start playing hands, okay? And then it's going to be a situation where we have to know when to hold them or know when to fold them, okay? To quote the great Kenny Rogers. So that is going to take testing. That is going to take surveillance, contact tracing, and a willingness for all those people that really do want to reopen, a willingness for them to accept the fact that, okay, maybe what we were doing was working. Because at that point, people like me won't be alone in trying to praise prevention. It would be obvious to more people, hopefully, that when we begin to reopen, if we see a surge again, that a person would point back to what we were doing when we had no surge and say, okay, this is know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Gotcha.
Right? And that is kind of what we have to be ready for as citizens. This is going to be a true test. We're going to be taking some conservative bets, really, in how we reopen. The only way to know that we've done it right or done too much is surveillance and compliance when we identify that we're heading in the wrong direction, that this is a surge, that we need to scale it back again. Okay. And, another thing, the nature of our country as a whole, very large country, we consider us all Americans, but this is going to be kind of a whack-a-mole thing. We are going to have surges and spots, and it doesn't mean that a surge is going to happen someplace else, just like now, we have a lot of confirmation bias in the way that we want to apply this feeling that because New York's numbers are coming down, we as all Americans can breathe a sigh of relief, which we do because we care about our fellow Americans in New York. But really, our state has just been folding every time. They've been at the table. Okay. Not to belabor that metaphor, but I think it's very effective.
Yeah, that's really good. I have a graphic that I'd love for you to comment on. This is a graphic that I got from Forbes, and so I don't know if this is true or not. But there's 3 angles that companies are going for to kind of create an answer to this virus. The first one is repurposed drugs, which is they're using concepts from Ebola, HIV, malaria, those ideas. One is antibodies, and they use that from their antibodies are from recovered patients or animal produced, and they are seen to treat the virus. And then the third one is a vaccine, which is preventative. And this is the next slide that I have on this. There's 66 programs that are working on those 3 different approaches. 7 repurposed drugs, 16 antibodies, 43 vaccines. And then that's the timeline that they're looking at.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know anything about these, but according to this infographic, we're in to get a vaccine by the end of September of 2021. Does that sound like what you're thinking about?
Yeah, yeah. And this is exactly what I was talking about, the x-axis on the curve, is that up until this time, we've really been focusing on this y-axis, right? Flattening the curve. But what the question mark now is, how long does this graph go, right? And this displays it perfectly. The people that I listen to get my information, of course, my expertise in this is only as good as my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, but this is exactly the time course that I have heard people mention, is that vaccines will not be proven and available until this time frame. And then even then, because of how long it takes to make them, this is not going to be for everybody. It's going to be for at-risk populations and frontline healthcare workers. So,
okay,
everything that I have heard is consistent with what you just showed.
Okay,
But
so that's a long ways.
Yes, yeah, and that's why we're still trying to focus on these other repurposed drugs like you're mentioning, and that's what I meant when we're finding out more about things that don't work than do work. But that is helpful. Waste time trying things that have been proven not to work in these ill patients. But that middle ground that people have a lot of hope for is that convalescent antibody transfusions. So patients that are, it was in the news, Tom Hanks is donating his blood. That hopefully the presence of these antibodies from patients that are recovering will either shorten the duration of illness or reduce the severity of illness in patients that are currently sick.
So you had shared this analogy. We're kind of in the second inning of a 9-inning game.
Yeah, and that's right along the lines of Dr. Michael Osterholm, he's an infectious disease epidemiologist out of University of Minnesota. And he also has used the analogy where, we feel very satisfied we are at the peak of something. And that in his mind is the foothill of a very large mountain. And you can also use the Winston Churchill. This is not the beginning of the end, but this may be the end of the beginning, right? In the fact that we have accomplished saving a lot of lives doing what we're doing. But until we have definitive treatment or definitive prevention, we have many, many peaks to climb ahead of us. And what's also interesting about the sports analogy is that the strategy changes. If you take a look at in basketball, if you're losing, you may take a last second shot from a long distance from the basket, taking more risk than benefit because of what you're up against. This game, the strategy, the approach will change as we move on. That will be through the advancement of our understanding of the disease and the understanding of its treatment, and also has to take into consideration the overall feeling of our fellow Americans and what we are willing to be compliant with.
So there is a question in the chat. Has your hospital used data therapies from any other countries that has worked?
Yeah, I'm not an intensivist, but I will tell you that what we have learned, a lot of it has come from the Chinese, from Italy, where the death toll was just enormously high. They also tend to, there's medicine is a little different, so the applications are a little bit different. Learning a lot about patients who are put on ventilators and not surviving coming off ventilators has been revelatory. I think a lot of the European hospitals have tried to use non-invasive ventilation, so that's supporting oxygenation without a breathing tube. So it's something more than oxygen. It's like pressurized oxygen. Some of the images you may have seen out of Italy will show patients with almost a big plastic cube on their head, and the atmosphere that's inside that cube is pressurized so that it's easier for them to take a breath. Placing patients face down. Normally, in my clinical experience in the ICU, that was only something that was done after putting breathing tubes in. And now there's some data that just putting an awake patient who's not on a ventilator face down has shown improvement in their oxygenation and may either delay the need for a ventilator or eliminate the need for a ventilator, which I thought, for myself in my profession, I thought that was very interesting to see. So there has been quite a bit of shared network, and I would tell you it exists in the societies, the world societies, in these subspecialties. It also lives in the scientific journals, where people are very eager to share their experience and share their information. Much of it doesn't trickle up into the non-medical professional consciousness until you see a CNN update about something. But the matriculation of that information is continuous, and it does take a trained eye, because like all things right now, the desire to share the information is being held back by the need to validate the information. And so that is up to editorial boards, that's up to each individual, provider reading it, making sure it's applicable to their patient, and then making those decisions. But there is a lot of information sharing, and it's really up to us to try and vet the information and make sure it's applicable to the situation that each provider is in.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, so another question in the chat is, have you seen, do you know any possibilities where the communication between science and the government has been better received, that we can kind of highlight or say that?
I mean, in my experience, I think I see the point in what you're saying, that it does seem a bit contentious and there's some blame going around. But I would tell you that within the societies of medicine and science, there really doesn't seem to be a lot of blame going on.
Okay.
Which I think is really encouraging. For the people that have seen this with their own eyes, for the people that have had to make the worst decision a medical provider ever has to make, which would be rationing care, which we have not seen here, but in some countries they have unfortunately been forced to do that. I don't really feel any of the barriers that we probably perceive in the political world. Not in the societies of science and medicine. I don't feel that at all.
Great. There's a comment here that says, this is such helpful information. Thank you. They would love to hear what makes you most hopeful when navigating this pandemic.
I do really feel hopeful about the willingness of people to comply and understand what is so terribly troubling about this disease, which is asymptomatic transmission. And for those people, who really kind of, some of the signs, I don't know, you saw in the video you posted, but give me liberty or give me death, for example. So that is that's a quote from 1775, obviously, and right before the Revolution. And a person that felt strongly about that took up arms and then went to the front lines to fight against the British. They could make that decision for themselves and put themselves in harm's way. I think what is maybe misconstrued about this disease is that your individual decision not to comply or not to maintain physical distancing, it may not risk your life, it may not risk your loved one's life, but it's someone else. The comparison of this disease, when we hear people on the news say, our numbers of motor vehicle accidents are greater than this, why don't we do stay-at-home orders for motor vehicle accidents? I mean, the simple reason is that motor vehicle accidents are not contagious. And the patients who are suffering from motor vehicle accidents don't go on to kill the providers trying to take care of them. That's really the simple aspect of it. What makes me so hopeful is the success that we've seen and the willingness of people to understand this. A majority of people, despite the misinformation, there is an appetite, there is a willingness to do what we can to suffer as much as we are economically, socially, to save a life of a person that we don't even know.
So the last one that we have is how are you doing? And how are you able to stay safe?
I mean, just at work, I have been blessed with an institution that I feel has gone to great lengths to make us feel safe, to give us the equipment and allow us to help design the way in which we give care that maintains that balance, providing excellent high-level care and maintaining the health of the workforce that's applying that intervention, which has been great. I feel very lucky. I feel very lucky to be in the state that I'm living in, to have the colleagues that I have. And really, I'm apart outside of the hospital. The only thing that really concerns me is just not getting people sick that I care about. My exposure is greater than the average bear. There are certainly people within the hospital that have much greater exposure than I do, but I feel that I'm able to take all the precaution that is necessary in order to keep myself safe and not transmit this to the people that I live with or the people that I care about.
How has sheltering in place affected you and your family in this time?
I mean, I think it's affected us in the same ways that you have. Obviously our daughters are very close and on all the time, and we're so grateful to have Betty Lou a FaceTime call away, because that, to me, especially for our youngest, the 4-year-old, she doesn't have a Betty Lou, and so some of her social skills, or what she would pick up just being in a classroom, are lost, or at least put on hold right now. Mm-hmm. And I think those are hard to appreciate even for a 4-year-old. My wife, Kate, has made a great point where I didn't even really think about it, but my 4-year-old daughter's preschool class, she is one of the older kids, and she has a role. I mean, that was 32 hours of her week was being one of the oldest kids in her class and consoling younger kids, or teaching younger kids, or folding towels with Mandy, her school teacher. And when she's in this stay-at-home society, in our nuclear home, she's the youngest one.
Yeah.
She has, we're trying to help her maintain some of the agency that she may have lost in that school environment, which I really, it did not occur to me. But Kate pointed that out to me, and I think it's very astute. I think it's spot on. You know, they're concerned for me at work. June, my daughter, often will just text me out of nowhere, wash your hands or stay safe. I'll try and sneak out of the house, 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and she'll sit up in bed and she'll say, wash your hands, wear your mask. It's at the forefront of her mind.
Yeah.
What I do and the nature of my job. So,
well, thank you again for your service.
There is one other thing I wanted to mention, Jeff, when you get a chance.
Go for it.
Well, just some, obviously I'm not, I am in healthcare, and speaking to you as somebody who probably has more, exposure to what's going on outside of what's happening on a screen. But the people that I rely on for accurate information, I just wanted to share that with some of your listeners.
Yes, definitely.
So the people that I follow in the news, they make several appearances, and they also have Twitter accounts and post, are Scott Gottlieb, who is a former FDA commissioner. He has been very informative and provided solid information and interpretation. Andy Slavitt, who is the former administrator for CMS, so that's Medicare, Medicaid services, also providing a lot of great insight. He posts a lot of short articles on Medium. His article today was really talking about coronavirus in the Native American population on the reservations. It's a 4-minute read, but really opened my eyes. I encourage you to read that. And then Michael Osterholm, who I mentioned, who's that infectious disease epidemiologist and the director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota. If you just Google his name on the local Minnesota radio station, he does a regular 10-minute spot, just giving updates. And he's the one that really opened my eyes to this x-axis, this longitudinal time course, and that this is now really what we're dealing with, that the space under that curve has not changed yet. And that the only thing that we can do to change that is definitive treatment, herd immunity, or vaccine. And that we are in the second inning of a 9-inning game. We're on the foothills of this K2 Mount Kilimanjaro climb. Any way you want to put it, we're going to need to have some emotional endurance as a species in order to get through this.
Okay, that's really great insight to me, is realizing that we need some endurance in this. Just as in terms of feedback, people have really felt the content regarding University of Washington and that connection and what's happening on the West Coast. That was really surprising. They really also appreciated the visuals, analogy of the match and the mousetrap, those concepts. And it's really interesting about the Seattle flu study and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they also thought it was a perfect tribute to Kenny Rogers.
Yeah. There will be a time when this is over. And I would love if even just a handful of people would remember those names: Helen Chu, Dr. Keith Jerome, and I want to make sure I pronounce the next one right, Alex Greninger up at University of Washington, because their expertise and their willingness to persist in order to elevate this public health crisis definitely saved lives and impacted me and you and anybody who wanted to listen, and had leaders that wanted to listen. It made a difference.
Well, again, thank you so much, James Hilliard, for being with us today, and thank you for your service.
Thanks for doing this, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming, and we will see you later. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.